Hello and welcome. My name's Angie Holden and I'm the blogger behind the Country Chic Cottage. Today I'm back with another Glowforge Aura project, and today we are going to do some engraving tests. So I'm actually going to do 3 different engraving projects. So I'm going to engrave a wood cutting board that's thicker. I am going to have some pre-made faux leather patches and I'm going to engrave one of those. And then I'm going to use some slate coasters and engrave that in the Glowforge Aura. So sort of something thin, something thick, and something in the middle. This is for demonstration so you can see kind of how the engraving works. So there are like about 10 or so materials, and then it says even more on the Glowforge website that it says this machine can engrave. So there are many possibilities for engraving with the Glowforge Aura. So I kind of wanted to go over what the possibilities are thickness wise, and how do you find the settings for this? Like, how do you get the engraving right? So we're going to talk about that as well. Now, when you are finding products to engrave in your machine, you do always want to find things that, like for these patches, I made sure it was laser ready leather. So you do want to look for something that's laser ready. In the case of the slate, I made sure it was a slate that was unfinished, so nothing on it, no kind of finishing. And then this cutting board was a handmade all natural wood cutting board, and it just had like an oil on it. So always make sure that they are safe to use with your laser, regardless of the material you pick. And then the material does need to be flat, so you can't engrave things like tumblers, so it does need to be flat, which in this case all 3 of these are. And then it does need to be 3/4 of an inch or less in thickness. Now, if it is over 1/4 of an inch thick, you do have a size restriction. So it is about like 12 by 12 inches, and I'll show you why. If it is like 1/4 inch to, super thin material, so up to 1/4 inch thick, you do still have a 12-inch width restriction, but there is a pass-through. So I'm not going to do that in this video. I'm going to do a future video on the pass-through tray. So if you have materials in that range, you could possibly use the pass-through feature. But today we're just going to engrave without that pass-through feature and show you some of the features of that. So first we're going to do this patch, and I'm going to show you another feature in this video. So we are going to talk about how the Glowforge Aura will scan your design. So I'm going to do a few designs, some of which I hand drew. On the cutting board, I'm going to use a handwritten recipe. So I'm going to kind of show you that feature as well, how the machine itself will scan your drawing or your piece of paper and actually put that engraving onto your surface. So let's take a look first at doing this pre-made patch. Start by opening up app.glowforge.com, then click Create a New Design. We're going to click Trace a Design, and first you'll see the inside of your Glowforge Aura. Go ahead and lift that lid and add your piece of paper that you have your drawing on. The software will scan that piece of paper and it will show the scan on your screen. Now you scan a certain area, so you don't have to worry about the entire area, but you can delete different areas by adjusting your artwork. So you could delete areas, you can adjust the brightness, contrast, sharpness, anything you would like to adjust. So then you're going to remove that piece of paper from the Glowforge Aura and add whatever you are going to engrave inside. In this case, I'm going to use that patch. Then I can resize, I can rotate, I can do whatever I want to with my design and locate it exactly on that patch. Now I have found the location to be extremely accurate, so it will be exactly in the location I put it in. Now I've left the grate in here because this patch is extremely thin. So it's less than 1/4 of an inch, so I can do it right on the grate. But I will need a custom material setting because this is not a proof grade material. Now to get custom material settings, you can search the Glowforge forums as something that's recommended. I actually found a Facebook group and someone had done some of these patches already. So I had a pretty good idea of the material settings I was going to use. So I clicked custom and I set my material settings. So here on the screen you can see the material settings that I used, and I went ahead and added that, and I added it as leather patch 1 with a 1 beside it, just in case I needed to do some experiments later on. So yes, perhaps the first thing that you do doesn't actually work, then you would want to either resave or save it as a different material setting. So I saved it as leather patch 1, and I did make sure it was an engrave and not a cut or a score. Then I clicked where that material is, and I said that I would use an uncertified material, And it does say to give a material thickness. This is fairly thin. I gave it a rough thickness, but you can measure the thickness and put it in here. Now we're ready to print. So I went ahead and clicked print, and now we're ready to send this to our Glowforge. You can see that this image took about 25 minutes to do with the settings that I had. So let's go ahead and watch the Glowforge Aura engrave this leather patch. Once it's done engraving, you do want to make sure everything's done. Make sure it says complete on your screen. Then we're going to go ahead and lift the lid and remove the patch. And you can see this gorgeous engraving on this patch. I was super impressed with the location as well as the quality of this. The settings really were just perfect. So now let's engrave that cutting board. So what I want to do is first scan that recipe. So I am going to scan it similarly to the way I did before. And I want to get just my design. And I want it to be just an engraving design. And here it was giving me a cut and an engrave, and I just told it to ignore that cut portion and just the engraving portion. And again, I can adjust my artwork if I would like to. And for this one, I just want to note I did scan it a few different times to get the best scan possible, and I moved it around inside of the Glowforge. It seemed like the light was hitting certain areas of the paper and not giving me as good of the image. And then, like I said, the cutting board is thick, so we're going to have to remove that grate and then add the cutting board inside. So any thick materials that you engrave need to be both flat as well as within the size to fit inside of here. So I like to keep it 12 inches by 12 inches to fit inside this well that's inside the Glowforge Aura. Now you do always want to make sure that this is not more than 3/4 of an inch thick because you don't want your head to hit any of your material. And now that my material is inside, I can resize and move around the engraving portion of my design. And then I want to add my settings. So what I'm going to do on this one, I'm not going to create my own settings. I'm going to tell the Glowforge Aura to use the medium walnut hardwood setting. I went ahead and went in, made sure it was on the bitmap draft engrave under Glowforge, not under the custom setting. This is one option for your settings when doing some of these odd materials, instead of adding a custom material setting. And then I was ready to print. And as you can see, this took 1 hour and 46 minutes to engrave in this cutting board. So definitely not a quick project, but one that I think is well worth it. So let's watch the Glowforge Aura engrave this cutting board. Once the print is done, we just open the lid and remove the cutting board. I really do think that this turned out perfectly. I love the engraving in this, and I think these would make an amazing gift idea. So now we've done something thin, we've done something thick. Let's go in the middle. When you put anything in the Glowforge Aura, you're gonna wanna measure the thickness of it. And you do wanna measure the total thickness. Now it might be on the product listing, but if you are going to do some of these odd things, you are going to need to know the thickness. And you want to know the total thickness. So for this slate, for instance, the thickness would be the thickness of the coaster itself, plus if you can see there's little feet on it, and we're going to want to know the thickness of the coaster plus the feet. Now I use a caliper, and this is a manual caliper, they have digital ones, to measure thickness. And you just sort of grip it and measure the total thickness. Now if you have trouble reading something like this, then you can get a digital version. And there are also other products on the market. This is just what I use. But you do want to know the total thickness. So this, with the feet, is a little over 1/4 of an inch. So first of all, if your Glowforge won't home, it does need to have something to focus on in order to home. So you do need to put the grate inside of Glowforge Aura first and make sure it can home. So I went ahead and put the grate inside of it and added my design. So here I'm just going to add a monogram onto my slate coaster. So I picked text, I added an H, I picked a font I liked, and I kind of resized it a little bit. You can definitely resize it some more after we add our coaster inside. Now we need to add our coaster inside of the Glowforge Aura. So lift the lid, and let's talk about measuring the inside. Roughly the well inside is about 1/2 inch thick. My coaster, however, if you remember, is a little over 1/4 inch thick. So you need to be within the area where the grate is in order for the laser to focus. So if I was to put the coaster down inside of the well, the laser would not focus on it. So I need to raise it up a little bit. So I actually used a couple of proof grade sheets of material, and I actually ended up turning it over so the machine would not read the QR code. And that raised it up enough where that coaster is almost like it's going to be on the grate, but sticking up just a little bit. So now my laser can focus on it. So now when I shut my machine, the laser takes an image of the inside, and you can see that proof grade material with my slate coaster. Then I can make sure that everything looks okay. And I'm gonna do a custom setting on this one. Again, I looked on the Glowforge forum for something I thought would work, and I gave it a name. So this is my custom settings for a slate coaster, and they did work great, so you might wanna try these if you were trying slate coasters. I do wanna make sure this is an engrave, not a cut or a score, and I wanna pick that custom material setting that I called Slate Coaster 1. Then I click the material and click use uncertified material. For material thickness, I'm going to put 1/4 inch because I removed the grate and the coaster is slightly down inside of that well. It sticks up about 1/4 inch, and this one wasn't bad at a little over 12 minutes. So let's watch the Glowforge Aura etch a slate coaster. Once it's done, we'll just lift the lid, remove our coaster, and this one looks really, really good. The etching on this one basically discolors the surface. You really can't feel it, but it is 100% permanent, and it looks really, really good. So here's the finished engraved coaster versus one that's just plain. So you can see it sort of like etches into the surface. It just discolors the surface. You really can't feel it, but it is a permanent engraving, 100% absolutely permanent. And again, I did the monogram just as an example, but you can put anything onto the surface. So here's the drawing versus what the Glowforge Aura etched into the surface. And you can see it looks really, really good and super similar. I am so impressed with the location of this. Where I put it is exactly where it put it onto the surface. So I love that I can get in a precise location with engraving with the Glowforge Aura. So here you can kind of compare my original to what was put on the cutting board, and it looks so, so good. Super impressed with this, and I can't wait to make gifts for the holidays with this technique. All right, so the tricky parts of engraving with the Glowforge Aura, or any Glowforge really, would be a couple things. So the first thing is going to be your settings, finding those settings. So it's not going to be proof grade material if you are using something, you know, like a slate coaster or a pre-made cutting board. So what kind of settings do you use? You might find some trial and error, and in the case of something like this cutting board, you know, the cutting board itself was not inexpensive, so the trial and error part can be a little bit frustrating, but I feel like once you get used to finding those settings, researching on the Glowforge community, then you might kind of, you know, get into a rhythm and figure that out quickly. Now, when you are searching in the Glowforge community, the settings for the Glowforge, all the other Glowforge machines, and the Glowforge Aura, the settings are different. So you can't just take their settings and use them on the Aura. So you might find someone that's used the Aura to do the project you want, or kind of use their settings to interpret what you need to start and get a starting point for the Aura. So there's a couple options there. Then the second thing is finding the right materials. So I did 3 materials here. There are other materials listed on the Glowforge website, and then it says many more. So you can probably do several different materials. Like I said, safety first, make sure everything's laser ready, or a natural slate material like this one, and then sized correctly. So 3/4 inch or less, and flat is absolutely critical. You don't want to risk hitting your laser head. So I did several things here where I measured thicknesses, raised things up, you know, used a straight edge to make sure that nothing was going to hit my laser head. I was always super cautious. And then always, always stay by your Glowforge the entire time. So when we're talking about intricate projects like this cutting board, it took 1 hour and 46 minutes. So what I did is I had my laser running and worked on my computer while it ran, so I could sit right beside it and watch it the entire time. So you always want to use safety and caution when using the laser at all times. And when some of these projects take a long time, then you do need to account for that and make sure you have time to finish the project. Now, I have heard some people question about like the internet going out or whatever, and I wanted to note, while I was doing this patch, my internet actually went out, and it went out for a while, but everything continued to cut, everything did fine, nothing stopped at all. So I did want to note that because I have had quite a few questions on the Aura itself and internet connectivity issues. Since I talked about how the Glowforge Aura can engrave many materials, I thought I would show you a few examples. So here I'm actually engraving on some aluminum. So this is a coated aluminum, and really all you're doing is taking that coating off. So look for aluminum blanks that say they're laser ready with a coating on them. Now you can see that some of these worked better than others. So the darker the color, the better I found it worked. So this light pink, the engraving is barely on there. So you can barely see the A that I put on the pink version. You can see a longer video about this project on my Instagram. Then if you want to engrave pencils, my friend Anne over at The Useless Crafter has a tutorial for that. I am going to link to that below. That's a little more in depth than I went into in this video. So go ahead and head there to see how to hold those pencils. So I did say things needed to be flat. However, things like pencils will work in the Glowforge Aura. Now, why the Glowforge Aura can't do clear acrylic, it can do some colored acrylics. And on my first video with the Glowforge, I actually engraved and cut this keychain with the Glowforge Aura. So you can see more about that on my last video, and I'll link to that below. You can see how Jennifer Maker used the trace function for photos of her pets on a cute frame. So this is one way to use that trace function for photographs, and you can head on over to her video to see the details. So now, if you have any questions about engraving with the Glowforge Aura, drop down in the comment section, ask away. If you liked this video and it helped you, give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, head on over to our YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button. We have videos just like this one every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss any of those. So thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.